We have not seen a prolonged inflationary period like this since the Jimmy Carter era of the 1970s, but our politicians and policymakers seem to believe that creating more inflation is the best way to take us out of the recession without any consideration for the long-term consequences. They keep insisting that this inflation spike is gonna be transitory, and they deny that the economic crisis they're creating while trying to generate a non-stimulus-induced rebound in economic growth is real. They try to minimize the severity of these issues so that they can keep on creating, borrowing, and spending even more money. The inflation crisis is reaching totally insane levels. But unfortunately, most Americans don't seem to be aware of it or to care that this is even happening. Every day it goes by, this country gets closer to turning into the hyperinflationary Weimar Republic. Those who are driving us there have become completely crazy. Last week, new data pointed out that inflation is rising at the fastest pace ever seen since the last financial crisis. According to federal data released Wednesday, over the past 12 months, the Consumer Price Index rose 5.4%. Now that's unchanged from June, despite economists' expectations that it would slow down, and marking the highest level since the Great Recession in 2008. Of course, the official numbers for inflation do not represent the real inflation that consumers are facing, and that's because the way the rate of inflation is calculated has changed dozens of times over the past decades. If we were to measure inflation in the same way it was measured in 1990, for example, it would be at nearly 9% at this moment. If we adjusted it to the way it was calculated in 1980, it would be way into double digits right now. It's safe to say that most people that lived through the 1970s would never imagine they'd see the same crazy level of inflation ever again, but it is now here and it's already visible, particularly in the price of food, gasoline, and vehicles. This month, new vehicle prices jumped 6.4% on the year. That's the largest 12-month increase since the period ending January 1982. Meanwhile, used car prices and gasoline soared by a staggering 42% from a year ago. Food staples, many other everyday items have faced massive price hikes in the past year. Bacon was up 11%, whole milk and beef roast, both 8% higher on the year. Travel expenses skyrocketed from last summer's depressed base level. Hotels up 24%, airfares up 19%. Rising inflation is putting the economic rebound in jeopardy as it cancels much of the benefit of workers' higher pay due to the soaring prices. As a result, this is significantly impacting our standard of living because although wages are rising, they are not rising nearly as fast as the cost of living is. In fact, recent data released by the Bureau of Labor Statistics indicates that it's getting increasingly harder for American workers to make ends meet because the growth of inflation has been outpacing pay gains, driving down inflation-adjusted compensation at a pace almost never seen before. According to the report, adjusted for inflation, hourly compensation fell 2.7% in the second quarter on the non-farm business sector. Now the losses to inflation are getting worse. Compared with the first quarter, real hourly compensation in the non-farm business sector fell 4.8%. Manufacturing compensation fell 3.3% compared with the start of the year and 4% compared with a year ago. That is the worst collapse ever. In essence, inflation is a tax on all of us to pay for our leaders' reckless spending, and it is shrinking the size of the middle class with each passing month. Sadly, this is just the beginning. Recently, a number of corporate executives have started to announce even more price hikes in the months ahead. For instance, the popular burger chain Shake Shack announced it will be implementing another round of price increases in 2021 to fight inflation. Last week, during a conference call, Shake Shack's chief financial officer, Catherine Fogarty, said customers will be paying 3 to 3.5% more for their food for the rest of the year. Many other companies are also raising prices to offset higher inflation and increased costs of products, parts, and labor. Amongst them, Unilever, the maker of Dove soap, Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and so on, has said it will raise prices to offset surging raw materials costs. And Yum Brands, which owns KFC and Taco Bell, recently said that its franchisees have also implemented price increases. Tyson Foods is also on the list of companies warning of further hikes in prices. During an earnings call, the top chicken producer in the United States confirmed that food inflation continues to push prices higher. Tyson CEO Donnie King highlighted that the relentless rise in food prices is hitting the firm faster than the company can lift prices, and retail prices are already set to rise on September 5th. None of this is going to end well, but despite all the warnings and the evidence, our leaders' response to this crisis is still creating, borrowing, and spending even more money. In fact, a new fiscal package has just been passed, and as soon as it was approved on the Senate, the new administration immediately began working on a new spending package, twice as big. On Tuesday, the Senate passed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure package. And then the upper chamber started to work on a second $3.5 trillion package of further government spending. By Wednesday morning, the Senate had already passed the framework of the $3.5 trillion bill, but some furious representatives alerted for the dangers of further spending. Utah Senator Mike Lee slammed the separate $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, which passed the Senate with bipartisan support, as an inflation bomb dropped on the economy. Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton tweeted, "Inflation is already crushing working-class Americans. If they pass their $3.5 trillion reckless tax and spend plan, this will get much worse." The president is now working on convincing his entire party to pass the larger measure. However, several representatives of his own party don't seem to think that this is a good idea and have voiced concern about the impact of the $3.5 trillion measure on the $29 trillion national debt. West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin is warning that there will be grave consequences and that he has serious concerns about another spending plan. In a statement, Manchin said that even though he voted to move ahead and debate the plan, he was worried about the grave consequences of such spending on the nation's debt, as well as the country's ability to respond to other potential crises. He added, given the current state of the economic recovery, it is simply irresponsible to continue spending at levels more suited to respond to a Great Depression or Great Recession, not an economy that is on the verge of overheating. At the end of the day, even though some of them do admit the risks of the current monetary policies and ask the government to have some fiscal responsibility every once in a while, most of them just keep voting for these exorbitant spending packages. Our leaders continue to ignore that this type of spending is only expanding the gap between the rich and the poor. And as prices go up and the cost of everything hits all-time highs, more and more Americans simply cannot afford their living expenses anymore, and they're having to downgrade their living conditions. Many families that were finally finding some financial stability before the virus crisis have fallen straight to poverty in less than a year. But the Fed continues to insist that inflation is a good thing because it stimulates more spending rather than hoarding cash. But when that spending happens with money that is artificially created, every dollar injected in the economy collapses the value of an already existing dollar, which means that our money becomes less valuable at a time that consumer prices and household expenses are rapidly surging. Do not be mistaken. They do know the imbalances they're creating with these policies, but they just can't help themselves. Out-of-control inflation is extremely dangerous, especially because it erodes people's purchasing power. It severely affects low-income families and elderly pensioners. Once that purchasing power is gone, there is no turning back. We will never return to normal levels. If they were so worried about helping our society as they claim to be, their decisions would be a whole lot different. At this point, it's getting harder not to feel hopeless. Even the motto, hope for the best and prepare for the worst, doesn't quite fit in this situation, because it feels like hoping for the best is, well, just pointless. We already know how this story goes. We know what they're up to. We know what they're gonna do. We know how our lives will be affected by this. We can only recommend that you prepare for the worst and do not let your guard down, because I'm afraid darker times are approaching us. With Congress passing another wild spending package after the many other spending packages that already have been passed, things will eventually get really, really bad. The Fed continues to pump billions upon billions of fresh dollars into the financial system, even though everyone who saw the previous financial bubbles bursting is now warning about an imminent epic crash. This is being called the greatest bubble in the history of the world. But as our problems continue to be swept under the rug, all we can do is watch how long it can last before it finally implodes. Thank you very much for watching this video. The new Michael Snyder book, 7-Year Apocalypse, is finally available on Amazon, and if you find our content informative, you should check it out. In the meantime, please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications to keep tuned for our next videos.